Remember we had talked about, oh, you were killed.
We invite you to silence your electronic devices. And we invite you to bow your heads for prayer. Almighty God, who has made of one blood the people of the earth, thank you for this portrait unveiling that reminds us of a caring and competent life. We express gratitude, Lord, for Senator Theodore Fulton Stevens, whose faithful service to you and country testifies to the power of patience, perseverance, and pragmatism. Lord, we're grateful for his courage in the Army, Air Corps during World War II, for his superb academic preparation, and for his decades of devotion to freedom. May this resilient life remind us that the race is not to the swift or the battle to the strong, but those who endure to the end will be saved. Inspire us from Senator Stevens' life and legacy to persevere in faithful service so that your will may be done on earth as it is done in heaven. May Senator Stevens' passion for liberty prompt us to see you more clearly, to love you more dearly, and to follow you more nearly every day. Continue to bless his beloved Catherine and all of us who love him. We pray in your sovereign name. Amen.
Good afternoon. It's an honor to welcome you to the Capitol and to this hallowed chamber. Catherine, it's particularly nice to be here with you today and the whole Stevens family. And that's no exaggeration to call this one of the pivotal rooms in American history. The Senate met in this room for 40 years, starting in 1819. The great debates of the pre-Civil War era happened right here. The orations of Daniel Webster, Henry Clay, and John Calhoun echoed off these walls. Oh, and then the Supreme Court met here until shortly before World War II. This room is a physical reminder of our predecessors' role in building the Senate and the Senate's role in building our nation. Senators still use it from time to time when we need to deliberate on deep institutional questions. So it's fitting that we gather in this place today to honor Ted Stevens, a man who shaped the institution of the Senate as an institution unto himself. Senator Stevens was as unique, dogged, and genuine as any lawmaker I've ever known. In a town that's often said to change those who come here, Ted was 110% Alaska's son and Alaska's warrior. But the Senate has a peculiar feature. Yes, we have the two leader positions elected by the parties, and I'll admit that especially these days, we majority leaders and minority leaders have a way of soaking up a good bit of the attention. But the truth is, there's only one Senate officer who appears in the Constitution. And there's only one senator out of 100 who sits in line for the presidency. It's the President pro tem. And in modern times, by custom, the job goes to the longest tenured member of the majority party. So here is the top-ranking office in this deeply political body, and you can't politic your way into it, or angle for it, or mount a campaign for it. It doesn't matter if you are slick or suave. It doesn't matter if you have national ambitions. All you can do is represent your home state with so much excellence and so much passion that they rehire you over and over and over again. The only road to this job is to never, ever forget that you come to this place to fight for where you came from. Talk about a job Ted Stevens was born for. So today, Ted's portrait will join the Leadership Portrait Collection for posterity. These limited and exclusive collection preserves images of majority leaders, minority leaders, and presidents pro tem who have rendered distinguished service to the Senate. Their likenesses watch over the corridors they walked, the rooms in which they talked and laughed and argued, the body they were so very proud to serve. So it's an honor to be a part of this historic moment and to be alongside friends and colleagues as we celebrate Ted's mighty contributions to the Senate and to our country. So I want to thank all of you for coming, and I'll yield to my friend, Pat Roberts.
Thank you, Max. I know everyone here, Chaplain Black, Mitch, Chuck, Pat, Lisa, Don, Marine Colonel Sullivan, and the other Chuck, have had many opportunities to speak at many special events. But this is quite a lineup. Ted used to say on occasion, if you want to be a big flea, you got to run with tall dogs. Catherine, Susan, Lily, Ben, we sure have them here for this very special event. All of us knew Ted as a colleague and a friend and an incomparable and one-of-a-kind senator. With Ted, they broke the mold. To me, he was my friend, my mentor, and a person that comes along your pathway of life who changes everything. In all of my years in the House, I seldom sheathed my sword with appropriators who were always rustling our mandatory unauthorized money. Our cause was just, but seldom successful. It did not take Ted and Danny Hanoi long to convince me not only to sheathe my sword, but to give it to them. I had been in the Senate for just a few months when Ted cornered me on the Senate floor, jabbed me on my shoulder and said, "You're coming with me to North Korea. Don't argue with me. Dole says you are Mr. Agriculture. You don't have to say anything, just nod your head." He was trying to arrange a third-party grain sale to alleviate constant famines in North Korea, make them dependent on our food supply. He and Danny almost pulled it off. If you want to get things done, it was a good idea to listen to Uncle Ted and his advice. Get to really know people. Don't pay attention to partisan diatribe. Socialize. Know that person. Gain their trust. By following his advice, it's amazing what you can get done. I still apply those lessons today. It works. 87 votes for a farm bill that the president just signed last year. Example may be better than advice, but when the two join hands, they make a team that's hard to beat. And that would be Ted Stevens and his friend, if not brother, Danny Hanoi. Either one could be chairman, and the result would be the same in behalf of our military and our national security. We who have the public trust know we are only as good as our staff. And Ted had one of the best, many of whom are in the audience. As a senator toting the bucket for our beloved Marine Corps, I mention one, Sid Ashworth. Back in the day, the commandant would trust me to follow up after a meeting with Ted. We all knew that the Air Force got top dollar, then the Army, then the Navy. Maybe we could get some retread tires and some baling wire. Sid'd say, take in 3 requests. Make sure the one is so big, he'll say, you know we can't afford that. Then with number 2, make that difficult to understand, fill it with a bunch of acronyms, and he'll just shut you down. Finally, for your 3rd request, take your number 1 ask and plead your case. What am I going to tell the commandant? My lord, at least give me this. And it would work. And then I would call the commandant and casually say, sir, we're okay. We got our top ask. Thank you, said Ashworth. My relationship with Ted was simple. I did what he asked. On a Codell very late at night, one of the many Codells, we were watching Band of Brothers again and again. It was Ted's favorite. All lights were off. It was past midnight. Everyone was fast asleep. I was sitting next to Ted, whose eyes were closed, so I got up quietly and attempted to turn the TV off. Ted said in a very loud voice, leave it on. The next part is the best part. I sat down. Temper is a valuable lesson. Don't lose it, quote Ted Stevens. Our Tuesday policy lunch often included discussions of appropriation bills versus policy and ideology. One day, Ted had enough and stood up and shouted, when are you people going to understand without Democrat votes, we cannot pass appropriation bills? He left the room, slammed the door so hard that Mike Manfield's portrait almost fell to the floor. Well, I waited about a minute, followed him down to his appropriations office. He said it wasn't a good idea to go in. I strode in and said, why in the hell did you do that? He said, you don't understand. I'm not angry. I just used my anger as a tool. Nevertheless, when he donned his Hulk tie, colleagues steered clear. Ted Stevens had a wonderful perspective on life. A successful person can lay a firm foundation with bricks that others have thrown at him. Even the longest day will have an end. And it did. The Alaskan of the century was vindicated. With this grand portrait, he returns to the Senate and he will remain here for decades to come. And in just 7 months, Ted and Danny will be honored again at the dedication of the Dwight David Eisenhower Memorial, Ted's favorite president. They led the charge to create the memorial. The dedication will be May 8, 2020, mark it down, and the memorial will be another part of the Ted Stevens legacy. It was a privilege to know and to serve him, serve with him, and to share his friendship. Alaska and our country are better and stronger thanks to his duty and his devotion. We will never see the likes of Ted Stevens again. However, he lives within all of our hearts, and we thank the Lord for enabling us to live in his space and time. I now turn to our President Pro Tem, Senator Chuck Grassley.
I enjoyed 28 years serving with Senator Stevens. We honor a great American senator today. With Ted, Alaska was always first. So you might think in your mind that that made him a very parochial person, but in reality, putting Alaska first fit very much with his putting America first. Alaska energy and national security were high on Ted's agenda, but they were also high on the needs for all Americans. So as it turned out, the nation as a whole benefited from Ted's priorities, even though they also fit in very much with his priority for his state. His ideology never got in the way of Senate committee. He was very effective as a bipartisan leader. I remember his bragging about how much he enjoyed working across the aisle with Senator Inouye of Hawaii. Now you know about that famous tie. Let me lead into it. My wife likes to tell me which tie I should wear each day, even when I don't ask her advice. I bet this will be brought up many times today, but sometimes I wonder what Barbara would say if I wore an Incredible Hulk tie like Ted did. I should have tried that today. My memory of the few times I saw him wearing his Incredible Hulk tie, we always anticipated a major legislative battle coming down the road. One of the most enjoyable trips I had with Ted was one of his annual tours, National Guard facilities in Alaska. I had the opportunity to see the beauty of the state, the importance of ANWR to the energy of the United States, the needs of native Alaskans, and the massive amount of salmon in the beautiful streams there. And I was the only one that didn't catch a single one of those salmons. Ted was proud of his family, proud of his work, and proud of service to Alaskans. I'm proud that his portrait will hang off the floor of the United States Senate for senators to remember Ted's great contributions to the Senate and to the country as a whole. Now it's my privilege to ask Senator Leahy to come. Senator Leahy, like I, and Senator Stevens served as President Pro Tems.
Oh, the memories and the stories I could tell. But Catherine and I have talked about them, and you know, he was, and I look around the faces of some of our colleagues, and we remember them. He's Ted Stevens' American dream. Growing up in a small cottage in Indiana, he went on to earn the Distinguished Flying Cross in World War II. He never bragged about it, but he just did it. He became the driving force to bring statehood to the last frontier of our great country. He was the longest-serving Republican senator at the time. To me, he was the epitome of the greatest generation, but when I came to the Senate, what meant the most is that Ted and I became immediate friends. He's one of the very best I had. In our oversight roles on the Appropriations Committee, he and I traveled widely. Some of the trips are fun, and some of them are a lot of work. He did invite me, Chuck, you should know he invited me to come on one of his salmon fishing trips in Alaska. I didn't catch a fish either. Marcel did. And found out, as Catherine's heard me say, Alaska salmon is the best salmon. Can I tell you just one little story? We'd travel with Ted and Danny and go all over the world. We were visiting one of our military graveyards in Europe. And this great storm came up, and we had to get back to our base, and they sent a cargo plane for us. They had the seats bolted in backward, and we're there with the tail down. The thing is shaking on the runway. Ted and Danny are sitting right behind us. The roof was leaking. And Marcel and I were wiping the rain off. I turned to her and I said, "Darling, remember I told you we got married, someday I'd take you to Europe?" Well, here we are. Of course, every time we'd be in Europe with Ted after that, he'd say, "Marcel, he's finally taken Europe." Maybe the 10th time we'd been there, but he'd say that. But you know, he and I and Danny, we all served as vice chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, as Chuck said. We served as President Pro Tem of the Senate, but I learned from him how to be an effective senator. He brushed off partisan labels. He said, you know, there's 100 of us. Let's do it the right way. And the lesson that he always stressed to every single senator, keep your word. I know if Ted said he's going to do something, it's exactly what he's going to do. And that level of trust is the foundation of effective governing. And politics do not belong in appropriations. In fact, appropriators have been affected by making the government work. And he was an old school lion of the Senate. I think we need in this country leaders with his brand of courage and duty and real patriotism. He didn't have to tell people he's a patriot. He walked in the room and you had a patriot. But I got to tell you one problem. Much as I admired him, I never had the courage to wear the incredible Hulk tie on the floor. I remember him standing, and Pat, you know this, he'd stand there with that, and he'd look at us, I'm going to take every single earmark out of this bill if you're not supporting me. Then he'd give a wink to those of us on both sides of the aisle to say, you're safe. And these others will get in line. Well, I remember a longtime senator defining senators by how he used the word. I've served with nearly 400 senators, but especially a few senators. And he was a senator and a close friend. And we're going to miss him. And it's so nice to see the family here. And Lisa Murkowski and I have discussed Ted. We've been on trips, we've told stories, we've laughed, we've pulled out a handkerchief a couple times. And so Lisa Murkowski, the floor is yours. Thank you all very much.
So many stories about Ted Stevens. We could take all afternoon here. You know, when you think about what we called Ted in these chambers, Senator Stevens. But I look around. I don't know why they put all the staff all the way in the back, but I would venture to say most of you lovingly referred to him as the boss. Probably all in caps. And then there's the family that know him as Dad or Grandpa. We've heard the Hulk references. You cannot think about Ted Stevens without the passion that the man wore, literally wearing your passion on your sleeve. I thought it was a pretty clever way to program that, by God, today is a serious day, and if you don't take me seriously, get out of the way. But anybody that can carry that off year after year after year is pretty remarkable. He was a man that not only loved his country as a patriot, he loved his state with a passion and a purpose that really is unmatched. And as I travel around the state that I am blessed to serve, there is no place that I go that doesn't have the fingerprints, that doesn't have the touch from Ted Stevens, and from so many who have lovingly called him Uncle Ted. Now, you might think that that's because he was the appropriator and he brought gifts, but you know, in fairness, he was family. He was family to so many, and that rough, gruff exterior, that was just the mask for the heart of the man that he truly was. Now, I have been on some of those fishing trips, and I don't know what it is with you guys, but I caught fish. In fact, it was at one of Ted's classics, Kit Bond. You've been at many of them. Many of you have been on the infamous Kenai River and fished there. I caught a big one year at Ted's tournament, and the big fear was that it was going to be bigger than Ted's, and then what was I going to do? But being a good junior senator, I had been smart enough to get a fish that was 5 pounds shy of Ted's record. Mine is on the wall there too. But I have been so blessed to have had literally a life with Ted Stevens. I think it was about age 10 or 11 that I first met Ted as a young girl. I was an intern for him when I was just graduated from high school, and then was privileged to be able to serve with him, where this man of such great stature and tenure could have been the one that had said, this is where you need to go, this is what you need to do. But he was the most extraordinary mentor to me, and I know he was that same mentor to so many of you. And as I look to those of you who have gathered here, recognizing that we're going to be unveiling a portrait that has been crafted by also a friend of the Stevens family, a friend of mine, Dean Larson. I look at you and say, this is the tribute of the man. That friends and family would come from far and wide to be here on a special day for this family, a special day for us in the Senate, to celebrate the ongoing contributions of an Alaskan legend and a true senator's man. Thank you. And now I introduce our congressman for all Alaska, for all of the time that Ted Stevens was here, Congressman Don Young.
Senator Murkowski, we said 3 minutes because I told him senators have a tendency to talk too long. But I want to do something a little different right now. I want to welcome the family. Thanks for being here for this unveiling. But we were a little bit somber. I think it was great speeches here, guys, including the chaplain's was outstanding. And everybody's sitting there. I want to give them a hand, okay? Good job. Now, that doesn't mean you have to clap for me when I get done. I just want to know that. Senator Stevens and I go back a long, long ways. When he was a prosecutor, he decided to run for the Senate. People forget that. And I took him around my villages across the Yukon Flats, and I had a terrible time. Because I'd introduce him, he'd make a speech, and then someone would say, I know him. He put me in jail. Because he was a good prosecutor. He lost that race, but he did run for the state legislative body and got elected. And everybody knows the history of that. And he served in the state legislature as majority leader. I was a chairman of commerce. He was a mentor. I was a mentor to him because he did have a temper. I didn't. But we did get things done as he did in the Senate. He was my senator. He had another fault. He talked me into running for this job because he'd just been appointed by Wally Hickel, and he had an opponent possibly in Nick Begich. And he didn't want that to happen, so he wanted me to run against Nick while he was in the House. So that's how I got here, because I didn't expect to win. I didn't win. He got lost in a plane. There's some similarity that way. And I got elected in a special session. But as soon as I got here, I stayed with he and Ann. And for about 2 weeks, and he gave me some advice. Don't talk too often. When you do, make it permanently and never go back on your word. That, to me, was a great senator. And for Alaska, what he's done, I'd like to welcome my good friends from the North Slope. They're all here. It was part of the, I call the great legacy that he left. He was the senator for Alaska. He was the person that we all admired and loved and argued with and fought, but we're always together as a team. I'm privileged to be on a team with all my senators, including the other one that was the other party, because we did work together for the state of Alaska. So I thank each and one of you who traveled here. My wife is here, who I love dearly. He knew her, by the way. We had fundraisers in our backyard. I don't know about that. But I want to thank all of you, and I want you to recognize the importance of this patriot. It's really going to be something. It's be here in the Senate side, the lesser house, but you guys have got to get that. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Well, thank you, Congressman Young, the Dean of the House, and it's a great honor to be here. I am also deeply honored and humbled to serve in the seat that Senator Stevens held for over 40 years with such distinction for Alaska, for America. And I know we're all waiting in anticipation for the unveiling, so I wanted to make sure, again, what Congressman Young just mentioned, to make sure that we give a hearty round of applause for Dean Larson, who worked so hard to make this happen. And no Alaskan should be surprised that, like so many throughout the state, Dean once worked for Senator Stevens as an intern. And so I think it's great that that Alaska connection to this portrait is certainly a key part of it. I also want to congratulate the Stevens family and truly thank them, all of them, for their service and sacrifice, and for sharing their father and their spouse with Alaska and America for so long. It's not easy. People know that. Sometimes they don't recognize it. And I think all of you really deserve a really strong round of applause from everybody. So I had the honor of first meeting and getting to know Senator Ted Stevens back in 1990, almost 30 years ago, not as a colleague, like my colleagues here, like so many here, but as someone who was very important to the most important person in my life, and that was my wife, Julie, who's here right now. And like so many people gathered here in the old Senate chamber, Julie was a Stevens staffer, and there are so many here. When she and I started dating in 1990, I was a Georgetown law student, and but I immediately saw the special family-like bond between Senator Stevens and his staff. This tough, gruff senator loved his staff like family, and you could see it. Worked them hard, but loved them. I have a wonderful photo from those days near my desk in the Hart Senate office building of Senator Stevens giving my wife Julie this warm bear hug embrace. They both have huge smiles on their face. It's a beautiful picture. So I got to know the senator and his family through my family, which can of course illuminate different aspects of his life and career and character. The stories in my family and Julie's family recall the integrity of Ted Stevens as a young U.S. attorney in Fairbanks in the early 1950s. Yes, he was a hard-charging prosecutor, but he also had a reputation as treating all people fairly, and I mean all people. Remember, this is the early 1950s, so let's just say Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg proposition that all men are created equal wasn't necessarily alive and well everywhere, especially as it related to the native people of Alaska. As many of you know, my wife, Julie, is Athabascan, Alaska native, and this reputation of Ted Stevens from his earliest days in Alaska as a fair-minded public official who took the time to help out a close relative of hers back then was noticed in my family and the larger native community. It began a half-century-long relationship and friendship between my mother and father-in-law and Senator Stevens, and it also heralded a critical element of his legacy for Alaska and America. Someone who cared deeply about the Alaska Native people and who work relentlessly to improve their lives and communities which historically have been some of the most impoverished in America. Reflecting back on his time in Fairbanks in the 1950s, this is pre-statehood, Ted Stevens said he, quote, found the passion of my career, and that was the Alaska dream. What was that dream? A dream, he said, of Alaska with the promises of the 21st century springing up from the Arctic. In Alaska, where our federal government works with us, not against us, to achieve our destiny, to develop our resources, and an economy for the benefit of Alaskans and for all Americans. And of course, this great senator worked tirelessly for those dreams. In the last speech he gave on the Senate floor, he recounted some of his successes. Quote, where there was nothing but tundra and forest, today there are now airports, roads, ports, water and sewer systems, hospitals, clinics, communications networks, research labs, and much, much more, he said. Alaska was not Seward's folly and is no longer an impoverished territory. Alaska is a great state, an essential contributor to our nation's energy security and our nation's national defense. In that speech, he said that he was proud to have had a role in the transformation of Alaska. But we all know Senator Stevens was being way too humble. He didn't have just a role. He played the lead role. And there's no doubt about that. And that is just one of the many reasons we're all gathered here for this very exciting unveiling this afternoon. So I think I'm going to call up the Democratic leader to close out the ceremony.
Well, I want to thank Senator Sullivan and everyone gathered here this afternoon as we commemorate an old colleague of the Senate, the towering figure that Alaskans simply knew as Uncle Ted. Now, there are many senators who serve their states valiantly, but few embody the spirit of their state as Senator Stevens did with Alaska. Indeed, fewer still begin their political careers fighting for their states before they even had become states, as Ted did. While Alaska was a territory, Ted Stevens harangued his colleagues at the Interior Department about Alaska's statehood so frequently that it earned him the nickname Mr. Alaska. Not the most creative, but it turned out to be a nickname that could apply equally to his time as senator. In the 41 years Ted served in office, nothing mattered more than giving a voice to the people of the last frontier. In the Senate, we remember that voice well, particularly its fierceness. As was said, Ted said, "I didn't lose my temper, I know right where it is." And so, as we unveil his portrait today, we salute Senator Stevens' public service. His time bravely serving in our armed forces as a pilot in the Second World War, his work for the Interior Department, his service in the Alaska State Legislature, and his time here in the Senate, where his tenure reshaped Alaska forever. May we all be as devoted to our states as Ted was to Alaska. Now, after we conclude today's unveiling, we invite everyone down the hall to the Mansfield Room, S207, to enjoy one another's company as we continue today's celebration. And now for the unveiling. It's my pleasure to invite Catherine Stevens and the Stevens family up to the easel. I ask that everyone please remain in your seats until the portrait's unveiled and official photos have been taken.
tell us where you want us.
And I'll count you down. 3, 2, 1. One more. 3, 2, 1. And in the back row, would you mind saying all your tiptoes? 3, 2, 1. Thank you all so much.